Hello, I'm Paul Beckwith, and of course this is Shackleton the Explorer, keeping my neck warm. He's a great neck warmer, as long as he doesn't move too much. I'm going to talk all about a new report that has just come out, or it's just been publicly available by J.P.Morgan, a huge New York investment bank. And the title of the report is called Risky Business, the Climate and the Macroeconomy. Now, for many years, I and many other people have been talking about the dire circumstances and the huge risks that we face from our global climate emergency. But now we have mainstream investment banks that, even though they're still putting huge amounts of money into fossil fuel subsidies, they're at least acknowledging that we have to change something, what we're doing is not sustainable, and we have these grave risks. So I'll give you some idea of some of the quotes, as long as my neck warmer behaves. Okay, so although this is coming from the report, the J.P.Morgan report, although precise predictions are not possible, it is clear that the Earth is on an unsustainable trajectory. Something will have to change at some point if the human race is going to survive. So that's a direct quote. And another one is, the New York Bank, this is J.P.Morgan, is one of 33 powerful financial institutions to have provided an estimated total of $1.9 trillion. That's $1.9 trillion to the fossil fuel sector between 2016 and 2018. So this is after the Paris Agreement. Mark Carney talks about the climate Minsky moment. Hyman Minsky was an economist who showed how banks overextended, causing the 2008 crisis. So we're in severe danger from abrupt climate change. And finally, some of the largest financial institutions in the world are coming out and saying that we need a global carbon tax, and that we need to drastically slash our fossil fuel emissions. So let's get right into first of all, into the news reports, and then into the meat, if you like, of the article. Okay, so of course this is my website, paulbeckwith.net. Please consider donating to support my research and videos. Okay, so in Twitter, if you search the hashtag #JPMorgan, you can come across quite a few articles about the report and other information, but quite a few things about these reports. So one of them in particular is here, and some of the points in here. I'll talk about the report in detail, but basically, here's a quote: "Although precise predictions are not possible, it is clear that the Earth is on an unsustainable trajectory. Something will have to change at some point if the human race is going to survive." So this is the Guardian article that came out recently, just a few days ago, just late last week, about the leaked report for the world's major fossil fuels financier. It says Earth is on unsustainable trajectory. So basically, climate policy has to change, or else we're facing irreversible consequences. And the study implicitly condemns the U.S. bank's own investment strategy. So it was an internal report. It wasn't supposed to be coming out, I suppose, but the date is on it is January 14th, and it was, it appeared on the web recently. So they've provided $75 billion to fracking companies, Arctic oil and gas exploration, etc., since the Paris Agreement, according to an analysis compiled last year. And this report was obtained by Rupert Reed, an Extinction Rebellion spokesperson and philosophy academic at the University of East Anglia. Okay, so the climate crisis will impact the world economy, human health, water stress, migration, and survival of other species on Earth. We cannot rule out catastrophic outcomes where human life as we know it is threatened, notes the paper, which is dated January 14th. Okay, we have to change direction because we're pushing the Earth to a place that we haven't seen for millions of years. Okay, and it talks about a failure, global market failure to look at the costs of carbon and so on. Okay, so this is a very hard-hitting article from a huge investment bank. How big actually is the investment bank? So this article from a little while ago, I think this is from October 13th, 2019, talks about how billions and billions of dollars has been put into expanding the fossil fuel industry. And this just shows you of fracking gas fields in Wyoming. All these pads, road access to these different pads where fracking is done to extract natural gas, or basically methane. Okay, so this is a key statement. The New York bank, J.P.Morgan, is one of 33 powerful financial institutions to have provided an estimated total of $1.9 trillion to the fossil fuel sector between 2016 and 2018. This is, an incredible sum of money. No wonder why abrupt climate change is worsening all of the time when, the richest and most powerful companies on the planet are hell-bent on pushing us to expand fossil fuels. And this is basically changing the chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans, and it's leading to all of these extreme weather events around the planet. And it's putting us on a trajectory to basically to end the human race, the way it's going. They talk about some of the details of these other companies. Although financing levels are on a smaller scale than other parts of the fossil fuel industry, in the years since the Paris Climate Agreement, there has been increased financing for oil and gas projects in the Arctic, led by J.P.Morgan Chase, which provided $1.7 billion in 2016 to 2018. So this is a plot. This is a chart here. So J.P.Morgan here is the top banker for fossil fuel companies most aggressively expanding. So we've got, this is 2016 funding. This is in billions of dollars, so 20, 40, 60 billion. So J.P.Morgan Chase, 75.6 total, about 30 in 2016, and then these varying amounts in 2017, 2018, and 2019, start of 2019. And then we have Citibank, Bank of America, Scotiabank, Wells Fargo, TD, RBC, Scotiabank, Canadian, TD, Canadian, RBC, Canadian. These are U.S. banks here, up to here, and then there's a British bank, Japanese. Okay, so it's actually incredible expansion in funding of fossil fuel infrastructure. It's just it's mind-boggling that given our climate emergency, the big companies are still doing this. And Mark Carney, as I mentioned, this was an article. So he was Bank of England governor. He said that firms must acknowledge the risk to avoid catastrophic impact. He's been saying that for a while. and he talks about he warned of a climate Minsky moment. Okay, Hyman Minsky is an economist, and he analyzed banks on how they overreached themselves before the 2008 financial crisis, but nobody listened to him. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the report. So this is the report. If you Google "risky business, the climate and the macroeconomy," J.P.Morgan, you can get this report yourself and have a look at it. And I highly recommend it, because the point is this is from the financial guys. This is from the money guys that finance fossil fuel companies, and this shows that they understand what's going on, and they do call for a global carbon tax. But anyway, it's different coming from so-called tree huggers, or or even a climate scientist. When you have some of the richest companies in the world putting out reports, writing reports, and it wasn't meant to be public release. Maybe it was leaked by some people, I don't know. But anyway, this is the report. So it talks all about sort of the mechanics of climate change, the impacts of climate change, and the response to climate change. So I'm not going to go into all of the details, but it does say that climate change is a slow-moving process, not any longer, but it's no less dangerous for that. It's likely to be one of the key defining features of the coming decades. The longer action is delayed, the more costly it will be to deal with the issues. A delayed policy response opens us up to potentially catastrophic outcomes, which might be impossible to reverse. Okay, so it looks at how, it's a good backgrounder, well worth reading in its entirety, because it talks a little bit about the connection from human activity to CO2 emissions, and then from CO2 emissions to what goes in the atmosphere, what stays in the atmosphere, and then from the atmospheric CO2 concentrations to the global temperature, and from the global temperature to the global climate. It does talk about how the climate system is complex, nonlinear, and dynamic, and it talks about the inertia in the system, so that emissions in coming decades will continue to affect the climate for centuries to come in a way that's likely to be irreversible. Okay, it talks about the uncertainty, but also, the shape of the probability distribution functions, basically fat tails. So when it talks about equilibrium climate sensitivity, for example, you can think of a probability distribution curve with a mean and a variance, but also it can be skewed, or there can be kurtosis leading to a fat tail, which means that the effects can be much worse than we think. And because it's a financial company, they talk about GDP and the effect of climate change on GDP, capital stock, health, mortality, water stress, famine, displacement, migration, political stress, conflict, biodiversity, and species survival. So the whole gamut of things, but it does emphasize that the Earth hasn't seen what we're seeing now for millions of years. So it's very difficult to predict things. We can't rule out catastrophic outcomes where human life as we know it is threatened. Okay, now to contain the change, we need global net emissions to reach zero by the second half of this century. It talks about, we need a global carbon tax for something like this, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Developed economies worry about competitiveness and jobs. Emerging and developing countries still see carbon-intensive activity as a way of raising living standards. Okay, so then it goes into some of the climate science. It looks at the atmospheric concentration of CO2 spiking up, how CO2 and temperature track each other, and how global temperature is rising. Okay, I'm going to continue this in a second video. Thanks for listening.